surrender. Talk about this often, especially in the podcast settings, but it's just very present right now for me too. So I'd like to go back to that topic once more. When we are stuck in these ego-driven thoughts, then it's impossible to surrender. And you know, if it doesn't make any sense to you what I'm saying right now, just stick with me for a bit, because life gets so much better if you learn how to just ease into it. Because me, for many, many years, I was always pushing hard. I always thought the harder I pushed, the better the outcome. The harder I pushed, the better the monetary outcome. The harder I pushed, the more sales, all that kind of stuff. And it's probably true at times. You know, the more sales calls you do, the higher your revenue will be, and so on and so forth, right? That's not the point. The point is, what are you doing with your life? Are you working in a niche or in a field and in a realm where things feel easy to you? And I'm not saying that sales or making money should be hard. I'm saying if it comes easy, and if it's fun to you, and if you wake up in the morning and you enjoy what you're doing, then stick to it. But if you're always feeling like you're running uphill, you're always pushing that massive stone uphill, and you know, once you stop pushing for a bit, you go backwards, not just one step but many steps, then it's probably a good idea to reevaluate if you're in the right niche, you know? Because I can assure you, there are things that are meant for you, there are topics that are meant for you to be worked on, that will feel like you're going downhill all the time, and stuff just works, you know, and things start to align, and you feel at ease, and you sleep well, and you don't feel like you have to push that much, right? And again, I'm not saying that things should always be easy, and especially if you do something on your own, you're building a business and you're building, you know, new projects and stuff like that, then there are times where you have to push, and there are times when you don't want to do stuff and you still have to do them regardless. You know, I'm not that spiritual woo-woo bullshitter, you know, that says like, oh, life is all love and it's super easy and stuff like that. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there's that sweet spot with these big topics that we work on in life, you know, where it should feel like it's the right thing for you. And you have to keep testing. You have to try and test new things and see if this is what you're supposed to do, because you've been programmed. We've all been programmed in our early years to think a certain way, to think something is cool. You know, me, for example, I used to think that I wanted to go into investment banking when I was younger. I thought I was going to go into finance, and I was programmed. I don't know where it happened, but it happened, right? And somewhere around my, I think after, in second year of uni, I think, I met some bankers through some friends, and I was lucky because they opened up to me, you know, because we went out and had drinks and stuff, because that's what you do in the UK. You go for drinks after work, right? But maybe also for lunch. And so that's, you know, drink number 6 or 7 at 5 p.m. or 8 p.m. And so they would just talk to me, you know, because like one of my good friends would work with them in their team, and so, you know, there was a relationship there. And they would just say to me stuff like, man, are you really sure you want to go into this? Like, they were well into their 40s, right? So already in the field for 15 years and high up in the ranks. And they were like, man, I see my wife once per week. I especially remember that one conversation with that guy. Like, I see her for 1 hour on a Sunday, and that's about it, man. Like, do you really want to go down that route? Are you planning on building a family, or like what's your plan for life? And then I said, yeah, I think I want to build a family eventually, but not now. And he said, yeah, well, that now's the decision that you have to make. You have to think about, whether to go down that path, because you only make real money after 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and then you'll be stuck with the stock options and stuff like that. So now's the time to decide what route you want to take. Do you want to go down that corporate path and be stuck in corporate and in finance and not have a social life? And I'm not sure if we talked about addictions back then, but it was clear to me that they were waking up with uppers and going to bed with downers. And for me, that wasn't the problem back then. Cocaine, it was just omnipresent in cities like London, or later when I lived in Bogota. That stuff's just everywhere. Or Munich or Italy. Like, doesn't matter where you are in Europe, like in one of the big cities, it's just everywhere. So it wasn't really something weird to me that people are using, especially when you work like 12 hours a day every day. How else is that possible, right? It's like, I mean, like, just think about it for a second. You on the robot, you need your downtime. You need some time for relaxing and relaxation, and to fix your body, and they just keep pushing, and they eat their lunch at the desk in the beginning as well, and it's just not a good lifestyle. So yeah, I was lucky, that programming ended there in that sense, but I had no fucking clue what to do next. I was kind of lost in that sense. I didn't want to go into medicine because my family was in medicine, and I've seen all the wrong things with it. Being of service just didn't sound interesting to me, because my parents didn't have any boundaries, so they would always help. They would always be there for their patients and their clients. And I understand now, that you can choose that path, but it's just for a kid to see that, and then on the other hand see how much the government required for you to be operational, and all the paperwork. And me with my ADHD back then, like, fuck, you have to invest so much time per day on paperwork, and you cannot delegate, and nobody else can do that for you. Like, that, all that stuff just pushed me further away from being of service, because the only path to be in the healing space in a country like Germany is you go down the university path, right? And you go down the clinics path and all that kind of stuff, right? So what I was seeing was 12, 13 years of studying until I could, start making money. And so that was it for me back then, right? I had no clue what to do. So finance wasn't it. Medicine, doctor, all that kind of stuff, surgeon was also interesting to me, being a surgeon, and all that stuff just wasn't feasible anymore. So I went on to do my master's, and still did it in finance and controlling. So it was like a pretty specialized kind of class, and the master's was 2 years, supposed to be 2 years, and I dropped out after semester 2. And then I went on with traveling. I was just started traveling, and started building my first project like 1 year later. And I was in Asia, I was in like Europe, some parts that I hadn't seen, and then I moved to South America. And yeah, Medellin was the first touch point, because my beautiful girlfriend back in the day, her family was from there. So, also business-wise, that was a good spot, because, production-wise and with leather and stuff like that, which was what we're working on, it's just a perfect spot, Colombia, Brazil, really good in those types of productions. But, that's if you're interested in what we're doing back then, just drop it in the comments and I'll maybe make a separate video about that. But yeah, so my girlfriend back then was, from the States, but half of her family was from Colombia. And so we moved down there for a bit, couple months, just to check it out. And that's when I had my first real line of cocaine. And that changed everything. I've tasted it before and stuff like that, but it was never, that pure 90% stuff. And that all of a sudden just was like, holy shit, I can focus, Holy shit, I can do stuff, like for hours and without my mind just fucking talking all the time, from all angles and never shutting up. Because that was like my problem in all those years beforehand, during uni and school and stuff like that, that I was always distracted by myself, and then I would look for, the distraction in the external, so I could focus on that, focus on two things at the same time. Like I would write my papers with the TV on and with, music on and with stuff running in the background. That's how I would write my dissertations and my, just do all the work for uni. And that was the first time when I felt that, okay, this is self-medication. I mean, I didn't understand it back then, right? But that was the first time I felt there was something else apart from the Ritalin that I had tried, a couple years before that. During uni, I got it myself, and it just changed me too much, so I didn't really like it, and I just really used it when I had to, for, dissertation stuff, for example, where I had to, keep on writing for 10, 12 hours just to get it finished. And so it was just mind-boggling, how that illegal substance, in a sense, would just help me focus and help me calm down if in the right dosage. Of course, if you take too much, then it doesn't work, right? But that stuff was just life-changing in a sense at that moment in time, right? But anyways, like I didn't really have a problem with it. We would, get it on the weekends sometimes, and not really often, because I was also, modeling back then and working out 5 times a week and all that kind of stuff just to make money to fund the business that we were building. And so, I was very health focused, and we were walking every day for like an hour and a half. And because in cities like Medellin and Bogota, you try not to, go from A to B in taxis, because you're just stuck in traffic. So we would always, live in a place where we could walk to the gym, walk to Spanish class, whatever, right? And so, yeah, I wouldn't have a problem with it until a couple years later. But, for me, that still wasn't a problem that I was using it that much, because it was still self-medication, right? Like it would, feed a certain purpose. And the purpose was to stay focused on whatever I was doing, right? And yeah, I think Colombia was still fine, it's kind of still recreational use. And then later on, moved back to Spain. I was living in Barcelona, And that was when it kind of started to, you know, go into a different sphere, I would say, because there I just started drinking more, you know, for whatever reason. And I think, you know, it was also due to the relationship with my girlfriend back then. You know, we were starting to separate because she wanted to go back to the States and I wanted to stay in Europe, and so we both kind of knew, you know, this was probably the end coming up soon, sadly, because it was working well on many levels. But anyways, I think that was the reason why I went, you know, and started like binge drinking and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, that's you know, that was the start of the spiral downwards with the drugs and the alcohol. You know, it took me solid like 4 more years to reach rock bottom, and I didn't even stop then. You know, after rock bottom, I worked through the pain and just therapy, and I was still drinking, still doing drugs here and there, you know, not fully stopping. And then, you know, a year later or so, just shortly afterwards, actually, it was right in that phase, is when, you know, me and my wife started to get to know each other, and we were just, you know, we were just hanging out, and then she got pregnant shortly after. And I was like, shit, now I'm gonna become a dad. And I look myself in the mirror and I'm like, do you want to be a role model like this? Is this like the right kind of father figure that you would imagine for your child? And this was the final catalyst for me to really, you know, get help and start thinking about, you know, everything that, you know, I do in my programs, or in my program now. It's just one. And at first, you know, I just started to get rid of every single substance there was, you know, because I was like using heavy pain medication, opioids, Tilidine at the time, was heavy on those. And then, you know, got that out of the system. Then I was also smoking weed at the time, just because I couldn't sleep, because the nerve pain was so intense, you know. My nervous system was just completely, you know, like fried, on top of, you know, all the substances and stuff. So smoking weed, got rid of the weed myself, got rid of the opioids myself, slowed down with the alcohol, slowed down with the cocaine, and then eventually completely stopped with the cocaine. And the one that was really difficult for me was the alcohol. And that was when I needed to do like a lot of deep work, you know, for that to be lifted from the system. And intergenerational work, family constellation work, you know, plant medicine. Didn't do plant medicine for that, you know. I did an LSD therapy like right at the end, you know, when I already felt it go away. You know, I didn't have the urge anymore. I was maybe drinking like once per month, you know, glass of wine here and there, but there was still something there, you know. I felt it. And so I said, okay, let's try this. And, you know, that was that last little bit that got lifted from my system. And that was it. That was the alcohol story, you know. Now I can have a glass of wine if I want to, and it's not going to change anything, you know. I'm completely free from the addictive tendency to it, which is crazy, you know, because I was drinking for 19 years. 19 years straight I was drinking. I started with 14, and I stopped, you know, at 33. And that's that's the the substance story in a nutshell, a little bit. But yeah, surrender, I think, was the topic of this video, and now 20 minutes later we ended somewhere else. But that's just how I like to do this format, and just surrender into whatever comes up. Like, there's one big difference that you have to be aware of. If you are intoxicated, if you are using on a daily basis, then I would be very cautious with the downloads and the surrender, in a sense, because you will get a falsified, or you do have a falsified perception of things. That's for sure. I had that. And why am I saying this is because I did many wrong things, and I chose wrong paths because I thought it was the right one, because I felt it was the right one, but it wasn't. It was because I was intoxicated and my whole perception was completely falsified. Maybe not completely, but slightly. And that's already enough, if you're choosing the wrong path, by 5%, by a 5% angle, or the 1% angle, with time and down the line, you just end up in a completely different spot with business, with relationships, and with anything, right, in life. So just be cautious with my recommendation here. If you are intoxicated still, if you can manage to detox for 2-3 days, go to a spa, and then maybe you're kind of free from the substance for a day or two, especially if it's alcohol. If you manage to be free from the substance for a couple of days, try going for a walk, go to the forest, and see what comes up then, right? Like, because you might get completely different info when you're sober. You're not completely sober, just have a couple of days, because your system's still intoxicated, and all these toxins, in these different parts, and in your intestines, and in your gut, and in your liver, and that takes a couple months to be, sometimes a couple years to be really detox from that, which is also stuff I do in my program, right? And yeah, just be cautious with what comes up, and discernment is a big word here. Practice it. But yeah, if you're free from those substances for a while, see what comes up. Surrender into the moment. Surrender with what life brings you, and shows you, and all the beautiful things that come up. See you in the next one.